Word. All right. Well, hi everybody. My name is Janelle Ware, and I am the horticultural educator with Extension for Marathon and Wood County. And today we are going to talk about forcing bulbs. So I think we may have one more person that will be joining us, but I'm going to go ahead and get started. And we got a lot to cover today. So let me real quick get things set up here. And let's share that screen. All right. And just gotta get a couple things set up here. I want to make sure that I can see everything. Bear with me just one more second. All right, I think we're in business. All right, so today we're going to talk about forcing bulbs. I'm going to go over just what are the differences between bulbs, corms, tubers, and rhizomes. We use the word bulb kind of generically, so I want to make sure that we're clear on that. We'll talk about selecting bulbs, things that we need to consider, planting, cold treatments, forcing, and then what do we do with them afterwards? So let's go ahead and just jump right into it. Go ahead and pick, what is your favorite spring flowering bulb? So here I've got crocus, we've got daffodils, tulips, hyacinths, and grape hyacinths. So why don't we start? Let's see if we can annotate the screen. I believe it's going to be up at the top of your screen. You might see something that says more options, or maybe you have 3 dots. If you click on that and choose annotate, a menu will come down that'll give you some different ways that you can annotate. You can either use the marker or the paintbrush and just draw a squiggly line on the one that you think is the best spring bulb. There's also, depending on the device you're on, there's also a stamp feature. And if that's not working for you, you could always just put what your thoughts are right inside the comments. So I'll give everybody a couple of moments just to find those tools. See, we've got a vote already for daffodils. I have to say, daffodils are my favorite flower altogether, but when it comes to forcing, my favorite bulb for forcing would be hyacinths. And it's because that's the time, forcing is really the only way that you can really appreciate their fragrance. So typically when they're blooming, the ground is still pretty wet, sloshy, might be full of snow. So I see Faith is saying daffodils. We got quite a few across the spectrum here. We got crocus, a couple more votes for tulips. Tulips and daffodils are neck and neck. All right. Oh, there we go. I think that might be our last person joining us. Fantastic. And thanks for joining us, Heidi. So what we're doing right now is if you want to either put your favorite bulb in the chat, or you can also annotate the screen. You can find those annotation options by, if you hover towards the top of your screen, you may see something that says annotate, or maybe it'll say more options. And if you click on that, a screen or a menu will come down and it'll have some different annotate options. Some of them are just like a paintbrush, or there might be like a stamp feature with a check mark or an arrow or a heart. So if you want to select one of those, right now we're just picking our favorite spring bulbs. And we'll give everyone another moment or two, and then we'll go ahead and keep going. No votes for poor grape hyacinths. I have to tell you, I love grape. They're not my favorite, but I do really enjoy them. I think their fragrance is fantastic. Yeah. Oh, we got another vote for hyacinths. All right. Well, thank you everybody for going along with me on that. We're going to be stretching those annotation muscles later on in the program, but at least we got to try it out just now. All right, so let's talk about what does it mean when we say forcing? What are we talking about here? It sounds kind of aggressive, right? We're forcing those bulbs. What do we mean? What's happening? Oh, and I see, backing up, Heidi said that hers was the tulip. Tulips are nice. Tulips are definitely, they scream springtime. All right, so what do we mean when we're talking about forcing? When we're using the term forcing bulbs, what does that mean? What are we doing? Because it's not quite just growing them. When we do it inside, it's something different. I'll let everybody take a moment. You can just drop your answer right inside the chat. Give everybody another second or two to, there we go. All right. So we've got, let's see, making them bloom early, imitating nature, simulating what happens in nature to make the bulbs bloom. Yeah, definitely all of those things. One of the things that comes to mind is there's something unnatural that's happening. We're forcing them to bloom at a time or in a environment that may not be their natural time to bloom or their natural environment. So that's where the forcing comes into effect. So another example of forcing is in the springtime, if you keep an eye on your lilacs and you see right when the buds start to swell, you can go ahead and take off, you could trim off some of the ends of those branches, bring them indoors, and they'll finish that flowering process inside. So that would be another thought towards forcing. They're going to be flowering indoors a lot more quickly than they will outdoors. All right, so when we're talking about bulbs, we're just using that word bulbs as a generic term for embryonic plant, an embryonic plant. And all of the bulbs that I'm about to show you are they are meant to store food. Okay, so you can think of them kind of like a hump on a camel stores water, or there's different structures, different types of succulent plants that are made to help store water. Bulbs are meant to store food. So we're going to start off with true bulbs. True bulbs are layered on the inside, a lot like an onion, and most of them have a protective tunic layer. That's that paper layer right along here, right here, that kind of falls off really easily. So that's the tunic. But not all true bulbs will have a tunic. So thinking like lilies, for example, a true lily, they don't have a tunic layer. They're more have scales instead. So, but all of your true bulbs are going to have a basal plate, and that's this right here. And they're usually round, or they could be egg-shaped with a pointy edge on the very top, and that's where the leaves are going to emerge. So some examples of true bulbs will be daffodils, lilies, tulips, like right here, and then amaryllis is also a true bulb. So Lynn says forcing is making people happy in the winter. I agree. I always think of forcing bulbs as a way where you're rewarding your future self with your, in the fall, you reward future self by doing a little work right now. So corms are compact modified stems. They're round, they're usually round, and they've got a basal plate like a bulb. So right here would be where the basal plate is. They're flatter in appearance though. And when corms become exhausted, they use their energy from growing leaves and stems to create a new corm. So if you dig one up in the fall, you might find a spent corm at the bottom of a new corm, and it's going to look kind of like a dried prune. And it's going to be hanging on to the bottom of the new corm. So some examples of corms would be gladiolus, freesia, and crocus. Now, tubers are going to be thick underground stems. They don't have a basal plate, so notice instead they look like fat fingers, right? So these are going to be tubers off of a dahlia. Some other tubers are going to be your daylilies and begonias and anemones. And then finally, we've got rhizomes. Rhizomes are swollen stems that grow horizontally just underneath the surface of the soil, and they'll send up leaves and flowers at different intervals. So examples of rhizomes would be iris, lily of the valley, and canna lilies. So, and again, they're modified stems. Okay, so when we're thinking about selecting bulbs, I've got a quick poll for you. Go ahead and take a look at that poll, the poll question. It says, what should you look for when choosing bulbs for forcing? So go ahead and take a look at those three choices, select the one that you think is best, and then we'll kind of talk a little bit more from there. All right. So the first option was high quality large bulbs. And that's going to be true. You want really, now's not the time to be chintzy because forcing is very stressful on a plant. And so you're going to want the highest quality and the largest bulbs that you can get your hands on. Keep in mind, like I said, forcing is really stressful. And so if you really want nice, large blooms or, really vibrant blooms, healthy blooms, you're going to be best off getting nice, large, high quality bulbs. The second one to keep in mind too is, and keep in mind when you're looking at those bulbs, really inspect them well and make sure there aren't any soft spots because the soft spots are going to end up rotting on you over time, and that's not going to be worthwhile for you. The second option was choose shorter varieties. That's also true. So here I'm really thinking in particular about daffodils and tulips because they'll come at different heights. The problem is since they're not going to be in direct sun, since we're growing them inside of our house, they're not going to get as much sun as if they were outside. And it'll be really easy for them to kind of be floppy, right? So you want those shorter varieties. It makes it easier for them to not be as floppy, and you don't have to worry about staking them as much. So C, all of the above was the right answer. A couple of other thoughts I wanted to share with you. When it comes in terms of picking your varieties, there's going to be, you'll probably find, at least for most bulbs, you'll find some of them, let's pick on tulips, for example. Tulips you can get as early season, mid-season, or late season. Now, the chilling times that I'm going to share with you in a few minutes, there's a range. It doesn't say, exactly 13.5 weeks. There'll be a range between maybe 15 to 17 weeks or maybe 12 to 15 weeks, depending on the type of bulb that we're growing. Now, when we're thinking about that variety that we picked, if I picked a late season bloomer, then on that range of chilling time, I'm going to want to stretch that out more towards the end of the range of the chilling time because it would be in the ground, it would be late season, so it would take a little bit longer for that chill to happen. Also, some bulbs will bloom longer than other ones. So tulips and crocus, they kind of, the flowers ripen and fade more quickly than say your daffodils, grape hyacinths, Dutch hyacinths, or regular hyacinths. So those will bloom a little bit longer. So if you're wanting lasting blooms, you may want to think about daffodils or hyacinths rather than the tulips. Also keep in mind Um, Freesia, amaryllis, and paper whites don't require a chill period. So that might be an option for you if you don't want to go through the trouble of planting and putting them through that chill period. Or if you're looking at kind of planning out nonstop blooms from, say, December until May, then you can start off with those bulbs that don't require a chilling time. By the time they're all finished up, then you can start bringing the other ones, the ones that have been chilling out. Okay. Now, okay, making sure you can see my screen, right? You see the containers? Okay, good. All right, so first things first, and this is going to be true for all plants that you grow, always, 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 you want drainage holes, okay? If you're growing a plant inside of a container, you're gonna want drainage holes. Now, next of all, when we're doing bulbs, we don't really need really big, deep pots. In fact, even standard flower pots are deeper than what we really need. Now, if all you have are standard flower pots, that's okay. You can still grow. Your bulbs in those. You can still force them in them. But if we were thinking about best practices, we want something that's going to be nice and shallow and wide. And the wider the better if you really want to cram a bunch of a bunch of bulbs in there. So here I've got a picture of bulb pans and azalea pots. The big difference between the two is the bulb pans are going to be even more shallow than the azalea pots. The azalea pots might be perfect for, say, an amaryllis or really large daffodil bulbs. And the bulb pans are going to be perfect for those smaller bulbs. And here I'm really thinking about like crocus and things like that. So grape hyacinths are really small bulbs too. Again, you can use your regular standard flower pots, but if you've got anything that's shallow that maybe you have it for succulents or something like that, that'll be best. Okay, so the potting media, you want something that's really well drained. Peat-based or coconut coir are fantastic here. What you don't need is you don't need a potting mix that's really high in fertility. So now's not the time. I wouldn't waste your money on those Cadillac brands of potting mix that have, say, forest products and bat guano and kelp meal and worm castings. You don't need all of that because the bulb itself already has all of the stored food that it's going to need to flower really nicely. So speaking of fertility, you will likely see when you go to buy your bulbs, you'll likely see that there'll be a end cap full of bulb food, or maybe they'll have bone meal or something along those lines. You're not going to use, if you're getting these bulbs for forcing, you're not going to need to add any sort of fertilizer in at planting. Go ahead and use those fertilizers if you're planting outside, but for inside, for forcing, they're not necessary. Okay, so with planting, you're going to be doing this somewhere between September through November. You want to, when you're spacing your bulbs, you want them nice and close together. You don't want them touching. If they're touching, they'll have a tendency to rot, but give them about a half of a bulb space in between each one. And this is going to be so that way when the foliage grows and when the flower stalks grow, they'll lean on each other a little bit and they'll help each other out to stand up nice for you. Tulip bulbs are going to have a flat side to them. Okay, so it won't be completely round. One side will be pretty flat. You're going to want to put that flat side of the bulb against or facing out towards the edge of the pot. And the reason why is that flat side of the bulb, that is where the first leaf will emerge. And so if you have that flat side facing all the way around, then you're going to have a really nice uniform pot with the direction that the leaves are going to come out. So you're going to put a little bit of potting media inside of the bulb or inside of the container. You're going to put the bulbs in, and then you'll fill up the rest of the fill the media the rest of the way, depending on the size of depending on the type of the bulb that it is. And we'll talk about that in just a second. Make sure that you label your pans, and some things that you're going to want to put on that label is what's inside there, so the cultivar and the type of bulb, so maybe tulip, orange dream, something along those lines. You're going to want to put when you started the chilling process, as well as when it's time to take it out of wherever you're chilling it. Okay? Make sure that you water really well at planting, and then if you notice that some of the potting media settles, that's okay. You're just going to add a little bit more potting media. Make sure you're not packing it in tight though. You want it to, firm. You don't want air pockets in there, but you don't want that packed in real tight. Okay, so how deep do we want those bulbs to be planted inside that container? Now remember, these planting depths are for forcing. It's going to be a completely different story when we're talking about planting outdoors. When we're planting outdoors, we're burying those bulbs somewhere, depending on the size of the bulb, somewhere between, say, 4 and 8 inches deep, right? We're not going to be doing that with the bulbs that we're forcing in containers, okay? So keep that in mind. How deep do you think that we should plant them? So now we're going to take out those annotation skills that we tried out at the beginning of our session, and go ahead and mark somewhere on our bulb here. Do we want to just, with tulips and hyacinths, do we just want to cover the basal plate? Maybe we only want like 1/3 of the bulb covered in soil or the potting mix. Maybe about halfway. Do we want just 1/3 sticking up? Do we just want the shoulders sticking out? Do we just the little tip on the top sticking out? Or do we want to cover them, like maybe a good inch or so? So go ahead and, so go ahead and annotate the screen where you think that should be at.
Should be underground,
I think. Okay, so I see some votes are coming in. We have one that's a little more than halfway. I see another one just covering up that basal plate. Lynn's suggesting about 3/4 of the way covered. I'll give everybody another minute or two. And like I said, you could either use the chat or you can annotate the screen. So Elizabeth's suggesting about 1/3 covered. All right, I'm gonna put in the big reveal. Here we go. So with tulips and hyacinths, we really want to bury them up to just the tips showing right off the top. And let me, there we go. Okay, we're gonna try that again, but this time with daffodils. How much of the daffodil do we want showing when we're planting it? Remember, this is for forcing. Give everybody a minute to try those. Lynn's saying, no wonder this has never worked for me. I would sink them in. Probably because you're thinking of like what you do outside, right? Well, outside that we really, really got to bury them in deep, but indoors, when we're forcing them, they don't need to be that deep. So got some votes coming in. See, one is about 1/3 or just under half. Got another one, looks like just the shoulders. Got those votes coming in. Faith is suggesting halfway. All right, here we go, folks. Big reveal time. About halfway. We want them about halfway covered. Okay, let's try another one. How about amaryllis? How deep do we want the amaryllis? So I got about a third. Faith is saying covered. Got somebody else that's suggesting right at the shoulders. Got another one, let's see, about a third. All right, here we go. So yeah, right at the shoulders. So you want them mostly covered, but I say the shoulders right at the third point. Okay, let's try. I think I've got one more for us. Okay, little bulbs, little tiny bulbs. Your crocus, your grape hyacinths, your snowdrops. How deep do we want them? Same idea. We're covering up the basal plate, about a third, half. What, just the tips sticking out? Do we want them, do we want to bury them maybe an inch or so? Got those votes coming in. Let's see. So Faith says they should be covered. Elizabeth says only the tip sticking out, maybe. Lynn saying just about buried due to size. And Heidi thinks they should be covered. All right, here we go, folks. Big reveal. Yeah, we want to bury them a good inch or so. All right, well, thank you everyone for playing along with me. That would be a fun way just to kind of talk about the different depths that we need to bury those at. All right, so we've got them planted inside of our bulb. Now we're ready for the next step. We need to think about chilling them, okay? So first thing you're gonna wanna do is keep them someplace cool, but not real cool, for at least a week, 10 days, 2 weeks, something like that. And the reason why is this is when we're going to, oh, am I sharing? Yeah, I am sharing my screen, okay. So the reason why is we want to, I apologize, there we go. So the reason why is if we keep them at someplace that's cool but not real cool, we're going to stimulate some of that root growth to happen. Once that's happened, once the roots have grown, like I said, maybe, or at least started to establish, and that's just going to be between 1 and 2 weeks. Then we're going to move them someplace between 34 and 46 degrees. We want them cold, but we don't want them to freeze, okay? You need to be aware of refrigerators and garages. So inside the refrigerator, it may have some produce, and in particular, apples will be a problem here. What will happen is the produce will produce ethylene. It's this gas that fruits and vegetables will create. That's they just kind of expel it when they're ripening, but that ethylene near our bulbs will cause the flowers inside of the bulbs to abort. So you want to be aware of any produce inside of your refrigerator. Same goes with inside the garage. You need to be careful about car exhaust. Okay, so just be mindful of that when you're thinking about where you're going to chill your plants. You want to make sure that you're protecting them from the light. So during the chilling period, biochemical changes are happening. Really, this is drawn towards that root formation, and then also the elongation of the stems, okay? You're going to want to check periodically, and by periodically I mean about once a month or so. That should be good. So check that soil moisture. You want it to be moist but not wet, okay? And there's a fine line between the two. If it stays wet, or nice sopping wet, this is really going to encourage a rot to induce into the bulbs. That won't be good for us. What you can do is if you're putting them inside of in your refrigerator, you can wrap them with plastic wrap, or like a, not plastic wrap, but like a plastic bag. Just make sure that you punch some holes inside that plastic bag. So that way it'll retain moisture, but it'll also still be able to breathe. And then depending on the type of bulb we've got, we'll have different timelines on how long they need to chill. And you can check in the handout, the Google Doc, that handout that I sent you. There's, I believe, 4 different links to different extension publications. They'll have guidelines on, depending on what type of bulb it is, how long you need to chill. So you don't have to write this down right here. You've got this information already. Okay, so thinking about that chilling process, how do you plan to chill your plants? Are you going to use an unheated basement, or maybe a cold cellar? Maybe you've got a fridge that you're going to use, or a cold frame. I actually read on the Minnesota website, I think it was the Minnesota Extension website, they suggested, or they offered as a possibility of digging a trench and then adding putting your pots inside that trench, and then adding 6 inches of soil on top of that, and then like another 6 inches of mulch on top of that. That seems like a lot to do, because you're going to have to then get them out of all of this in the winter time. So that seems like a bit much, but that might be an option too. So given all these different ways that you can do this, how do you plan to prevent rodents or freezing or light? Did anything that was brought up today, did that make you second guess or make you rethink, like, okay, how am I going to do this in the future? And if you have forced bulbs in the past and you've got any suggestions on any tips or tricks, go ahead and share them as well. So right now, I am going to break everybody into small groups. Bear with me. Okay, so you should see an option to join breakout group. Go ahead and select, I think it's a blue button. Go ahead and click on that blue button. And I will see you back here in just a few minutes.
Janelle, I don't see it.
You don't see a blue join breakout room? Oh, almost. Oh, there we go. Okay. It's 2:35 now. We'll bring them back in a couple of minutes. Okay.
We're having major internet problems. That storm knocked out our internet this morning, and I'm just getting kicked off right and left.
I'm sorry. At least you're able to get back in.
My neighbor is joining me today. They don't have internet. And I told her, look what you're missing.
All right, so everybody's coming back. Everybody was in breakout rooms. So
We
now
tried, but it didn't work.
I'm sorry. All right, so we've got, oh, I think, is everybody back then? Let me take a look. Well, they will be back. Here we go. Okay, so did anybody have any like breakthroughs, aha, something that you learned, or anything you want to share, or any questions that came from little small group discussions?
Janelle, would getting the little bulbs in glass pots with just the basil, is that considered, that's considered forcing, right?
Yep, that's considered forcing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I love those. You can even get little glasses, very small glasses that are hourglass shaped, that are perfect for hyacinths, and then they make larger ones for amaryllis as well. I always think those are fun. Those are gorgeous, but you don't have to have the fancy pots. If you're going to do that, what I would suggest is having some sort of container with a lip, so that way it'll hold water, and then something non-porous in the bottom. So it could be rocks, it could be marbles, whatever, but something so that way when the roots do grow, they will have something to kind of secure themselves on.
Right.
Another one that grows really nicely this way is paper whites. Paper whites do well forcing with just water too. And then go ahead.
We actually did that last year for our Master Gardener fall thing. Is we went, we had our get together, we did pint jars, filled them with gravel, put the paper white on the top of it, and by Christmas it was beautiful. So yeah, I never even thought about that. Sure, that counts.
Absolutely, yeah. All right, well, go ahead and what are we doing on time? We got about 20 minutes. I think that's going to be perfect for us. We are almost finished here. Okay, so forcing, we've already chilled them. We know they're ready to, they've been in the cool temperatures wherever we stored them for the chilling process for the appropriate amount of time, and now it's time to bring them back in. What I would suggest, if possible, so this is best practice, and then you can change this up based off of whatever conditions you've got in your home to make this work. But ideally, remember when we started off by putting them in some place that was about 50 degrees for a week or two before we moved them into our cooler place? Same idea here. So we've got them, they've been sitting at about 40 degrees. Now we're going to move them someplace that's about 50 degrees. Let them hang out there for about a week or so, and then we're going to bring them someplace where there's going to be some indirect light, bright indirect light. When you first pull them out of wherever they were chilled, you're going to expect to see about 1 to 2 inches of growth on them, of stem development. And if they're solid white, that's okay. It's because they haven't been exposed to any light. So as soon as you bring them into the light, they're going to naturally green up for you. Most will bloom, so most of your spring flowering stuff will bloom between 3 and 4 weeks once they're brought into warmer temperatures. Amaryllis, on the other hand, is going to take a while. So expect amaryllis to be 6 to 8 weeks out before you actually see blooms. The blooms will last longer in cooler temperatures. So and keep in mind, if you're growing plants in warmer temperatures, the blooms won't last as long the leaves are going to grow faster, and it's going to need to be watered more often than, say, if you've got a really cool but bright room that you can keep them in. So let me bring up the chat because I've got some questions for you here. And Lynn is saying, since so much energy is used by the bulb, is the bulb life over after forcing? We're going to get to that one in just the next screen. But yeah, you're onto something there. So before we get to that, though, what are some ways that we can prolong those blooms? So there's two main things that I'm thinking of, and you can go ahead and answer right in the chat. What can you do to make those blooms once our plant, our tulip or daffodil or whatever, once it's in flower, what's something that we can do to keep it in flower longer? Giving it water, staying on top of that water. Yep. So Lynn suggested making sure that there's plenty of water for it. That's true. If it's stress, well, one thing we don't want to do is we don't want to stress it. As soon as we stress it, we're going to end up losing that flower much more quickly. No direct sunlight. Great answer, Heidi. Yeah, that direct sunlight is going to cause it to go through its whole bloom cycle faster. So indirect light is definitely one of those things. No warm drafts, definitely. When you go to the florist and you're picking out flowers to give to somebody, where do they keep their flowers?
The refrigerator.
In the refrigerator, yeah. So depending on the height, depending on your setup or what you've got, if you can put the flowers inside the fridge overnight and then bring them back out into a nice bright indirect light space during the daytime, that'll help prolong those flowers too. Of course, if we're talking about an amaryllis, probably can't fit that inside the fridge, right? But maybe crocus or hyacinths, you'll be able to tuck inside the fridge overnight. So this is thoughts for you to try to extend those flowers as much as possible. Oh, one more thought for you. Hyacinth flowers may stay inside their bulb and fail to grow along stem. So if you place the plants inside the dark for a few days, or if you put a paper cone over the top of them, it's going to draw that flower out of the bulb. Something to keep in mind when you're forcing those hyacinths. All right, aftercare. So what do we do when we're done, once they're all finished with flowering? Generally speaking, there hasn't been enough light for them to have produced a suitable daughter bulb that will continue that life cycle on. So for most of your bulbs, you're probably best off just tossing them in the garbage. If you're going to be out in the garden anyway, and you want to try and see if the tulips will produce again, you can, just don't have your heart set on seeing them again, because it's such a stressful event. That forcing process is so stressful on them. They probably won't produce a daughter bulb, and they probably won't ever flower again, or even leaf out. That'll be it. They've used up all of their energy. The exception to this, there's two exceptions. The first exception to this is going to be daffodils. Daffodils are more likely to naturalize. So if you force daffodils, they're worthwhile to go ahead and try to plant inside the garden. You won't be able to get a second forcing cycle out of any of them except for an amaryllis. So most of them are going to be completely done. Daffodils are more likely to flower for you. Keep in mind, though, you won't get flowers. I shouldn't say you won't. It's highly unlikely that you'll get flowers the following year, but maybe after, the year after that, you'll get flowers from it again. So amaryllis, what do we do with that? You can keep, since the amaryllis will keep going as a house plant, keep those leaves going all throughout the growing season, all the way up into September. Fertilize the leaves, maybe once a month or so. And you're just going to, use just a regular all-purpose houseplant fertilizer. Fertilize them, and then in September, you're going to dry them down really hard. No more water to them, force them into a dormancy. So you may remember I said that amaryllis they don't require a chilling period, but they still require a dormant period. It's just that dormant period doesn't need to be cold, but it does need to be dormant. It wants about an 8-week dormant cycle. So if you force it into dormancy in September, bring it back out and start watering it again in November, then you should have flowers again, hopefully by the beginning of January. I'm just double checking there's nothing else I wanted to share. Oh, and as far as repotting goes, you can repot them, once every 2 to 3 years. Just make sure when you do pick out a pot for an amaryllis, you're putting it someplace where it's going to be snug. It only wants about an inch or two larger than the bulb itself. Okay, because like I said, it likes to be nice and tight inside of its pot. Make sure that you're always keeping records of the different varieties that you're growing for forcing, the length and the temperature of the cold treatment that you gave them, and the weeks after the bloom, like how long did it take for it to go into bloom. And also another really good record would be how long did that bloom last. And I'll tell you, once you start keeping these records from year to year, you can look when you're picking out your bulbs in the future, you'll remember like, oh yeah, that orange dream was really tall, orange dream tulip was really tall and floppy, or maybe it was really compact and it did really nicely for me. So hanging on to those records will help you out, help your future self out. All right, so that's almost everything that I've got for today. Just wanted to share right now, I am going to launch 2 more polls. The first one is a demographics poll, and the second one is an evaluation. While I'm launching those, if you want to drop a question, if you've got any questions, anything that's still confusing that you want me to clear up, you can drop that in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and just ask, because we're a pretty small group today. Otherwise, if you've got any like, oh wow, I didn't realize that, real, cool takeaways or aha moments that you had throughout the program today, that would be helpful too. In the meantime, like I said, I'm going to be launching that demographic poll as well as the evaluation poll. Before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and stop recording. If anybody's watching this later on in the future, thanks for joining us today.